Can you believe the everyday things that were totally normal in the 1950s are illegal today? These practices shaped daily life, on the roads, in homes, even in schools, and nobody thought twice about them back then. What does it say about us now that they're gone? No seatbelts in cars were just a fact of life in the 1950s. Families would pile into their station wagons, kids sprawled across the back seats, parents up front, and no one thought twice about safety restraints. At the time, cars were seen as symbols of freedom and style, not machines that needed strict safety rules. Most models were built for looks and comfort rather than accident protection. Lap belts technically existed in some vehicles, but they were considered optional extras that very few buyers bothered with. In fact, many drivers saw them as unnecessary or even dangerous, worrying that they might trap them inside during a crash or a fire. Looking back now, it is shocking to think about just how casual people were about driving safety. Parents would let kids sit on their laps while steering, or let toddlers nap in the back window shelf with the sun beating down. Police did not enforce seatbelt use because there were no laws to enforce. It was not until the late 1960s that seatbelts became standard equipment in American cars, and not until the 1980s that states began passing laws requiring their use. By then, decades of tragic accidents had proven the cost of going without. Still, to people who grew up in the 1950s, the memory of piling into the car with no restraints at all is strangely nostalgic, even though today it would be considered completely illegal and irresponsible. Pregnant women drinking and smoking publicly in the 1950s was not only accepted, it was practically expected in some social circles. Cigarettes were marketed as stress relievers, and alcohol was considered a normal part of dinner or social gatherings. You could walk into a restaurant and see expectant mothers enjoying cocktails with friends, or standing outside department stores smoking a cigarette without anyone batting an eye. It was not until the 1960s and beyond that serious studies showed the dangers of fetal alcohol syndrome and low birth weights from smoking during pregnancy. But in the 1950s, women who were expecting a child were not shielded from cigarettes or liquor at all. Looking back now, it feels almost surreal that society normalized these practices, but for millions of families at the time, it was just another part of daily life. Today, a pregnant woman drinking or smoking in public would spark outrage, but in the 1950s, it was totally normal. Asbestos was everywhere in the 1950s. It was woven into the very walls and floors of homes, schools, and public buildings, and no one thought twice about it. The fibrous mineral was cheap, fire-resistant, and strong, making it a favorite material for insulation, ceiling tiles, floor tiles, and even toys. At the time, few people linked the mineral to the lung diseases and cancers that would later devastate entire generations. By the 1970s, medical research had revealed the dangers of asbestos exposure, and regulations began phasing it out. Today, its use is banned in many forms, and strict removal procedures are required if it is discovered in old buildings. Looking back, it feels chilling to realize how something once considered a household necessity is now recognized as one of the most hazardous building materials ever used. What was normal then would never be allowed today. Cigarette vending machines were once a familiar sight in the 1950s, found in restaurants, bowling alleys, bus stations, and even hotel lobbies. All it took was a handful of coins, and out slid a fresh pack of cigarettes. Children could and often did purchase cigarettes directly from these machines without anyone stopping them. At the time, smoking was so normalized that no one thought vending machines were inappropriate. As the dangers of smoking became undeniable, governments began to regulate vending machines more heavily. By the 1990s and 2000s, most states banned them altogether except in adult-only venues. Today, the thought of a child pulling a cigarette pack from a machine feels absurd, but in the 1950s, it was part of daily life. That casual access is exactly why this once normal practice is now completely illegal. Drinking alcohol while driving was not only common in the 1950s, it was often seen as harmless. Many states had no open container laws, meaning drivers could sip a beer or a cocktail on the road without legal consequence. Law enforcement generally turned a blind eye unless someone was visibly drunk, and even then the punishments were lighter than what we would consider appropriate today. Families often thought nothing of it, with kids in the back seat while parents enjoyed a drink up front. It was only as accidents mounted and drunk driving became recognized as a national crisis that laws began to change. Today, the idea of drinking alcohol behind the wheel is unthinkable and harshly punished. In the 1950s, however, it was just another extension of the era's more carefree and less regulated lifestyle. What once seemed ordinary now feels dangerous and reckless, but back then it was part of everyday American culture. LEED paint-coated homes, furniture, and toys throughout the 1950s. Bright, durable, and cheap, it seemed like the perfect material for parents who wanted colorful nurseries or sturdy cribs. Toy makers splashed it on blocks, model cars, and dolls without hesitation. The sweet taste of lead paint chips, as many survivors recall, made the danger even more insidious. By the late 1970s, the health consequences became undeniable, and lead paint was banned for residential use. Today, homes built before those bans often require costly inspections and lead removal projects to make them safe. In the 1950s, it was just another Saturday project to repaint the family home. What was considered normal then is now recognized as one of the greatest household hazards of the past century, and it serves as a stark reminder of how much has changed in just a few decades. Airline smoking sections were not just allowed in the 1950s, they were expected. Planes had ashtrays built into armrests, and passengers lit up mid-flight as if they were sitting in a diner. Families with children sat only a row or two away, with no barriers to stop the smoke from drifting everywhere. At the time, smoking was so ingrained in American culture that banning it would have seemed unimaginable. Flight attendants passed out matches and sometimes even complimentary packs of cigarettes, adding to the surreal image of a cabin filled with smoke at 30,000 feet. Travelers accepted the haze as part of the experience, and the lingering smell of tobacco clung to clothes and luggage long after landing. By the 1980s, however, the dangers of secondhand smoke could no longer be ignored, and bans were gradually put in place. Today, the idea of sparking a cigarette on a crowded flight is absurd and heavily penalized. But in the 1950s, the smoking section was a symbol of modern convenience and freedom, not a health hazard. Looking back, it is astonishing how quickly norms shifted. What was once a routine part of travel is now remembered as a shocking relic of a different era, a time when passengers puffed away in tight cabins without thinking twice. Riding in the back of pickup trucks was a familiar sight in the 1950s, especially in small towns and rural areas. Kids piled into the truck bed, sitting on the wheel wells or standing while the vehicle rolled down highways and dirt roads. Parents often saw it as harmless fun, and children loved the sense of freedom and adventure. Families used trucks not just for hauling, but for transportation when space inside was limited. After church on Sundays, after-school ball games, or weekend errands, kids climbed into the back without question. At the time, there were no laws against it, and police officers rarely raised an eyebrow. Safety campaigns had not yet highlighted the risks, and seatbelt laws were still decades away. The wind in your hair, the wide open sky, and the thrill of standing while moving at 40 miles per hour created lasting memories for many who grew up in that era. Today, such behavior is considered reckless and illegal in most states. Modern parents would never allow their children to ride unsecured in the back of a moving truck. But in the 1950s, it was part of daily life, something kids looked forward to rather than feared. The contrast is striking, and it shows just how much ideas of safety and responsibility have evolved in less than a lifetime. Doctors prescribing amphetamines for dieting was shockingly normal in the 1950s. Known as pep pills, these stimulants were handed out to patients, especially women, as a quick fix for weight loss and fatigue. Pharmaceutical ads in popular magazines glamorized them as safe and effective, often showing slim, smiling women as proof of their power. Many general practitioners wrote prescriptions casually, with little thought for long-term consequences. For housewives juggling children, housework, and social expectations, The pills promised energy and appetite suppression. In an era obsessed with appearance and thinness, especially for women, the popularity of amphetamines skyrocketed. Few people realized the addictive qualities or the toll on physical and mental health. It was only later, when dependency and abuse became undeniable, that stricter regulations began to rein in their use. Today, prescribing amphetamines in such a casual way would be illegal and unthinkable. Yet in the 1950s, it was just another visit to the doctor's office where patients left with bottles of pills meant to boost their mood and shrink their waistline. Looking back, it feels unsettling that something now so tightly controlled was once marketed like a simple vitamin. This was a time when trust in medicine was high and the culture of quick fixes overshadowed caution. The legacy of those prescriptions still lingers, a reminder of how blind faith in convenience sometimes comes with hidden costs. Smoking sections in schools and offices might sound shocking today, but in the 1950s it was just part of daily life. Teachers smoked at their desks while grading papers, and office workers puffed away during meetings. Students in high schools even had designated smoking areas outdoors, sometimes with faculty supervision. The idea of banning smoking indoors would have seemed outrageous at the time. Today, the thought of smoking in a school or office is unthinkable and strictly illegal. What once symbolized modern living and professional identity is now remembered as one of the most harmful and careless practices of the era. Looking back, it feels surreal that children once walked through clouds of smoke at school and office meetings resembled smoky lounges. Spraying DDT in yards was a familiar sight in the 1950s. Families wanted their lawns to look perfect, free of bugs and free of weeds, and chemical companies promised that dichloro-diphenyl trichloroethane would do the job. Trucks rolled through neighborhoods spraying thick white clouds of pesticide mist while kids ran behind them laughing. Nobody connected these pesticides with long-term health problems or environmental destruction. Today, DDT is banned in the United States and in many countries worldwide, remembered as one of the most dangerous pesticides ever created. But in the 1950s, it was just part of Saturday chores, as normal as mowing the lawn or raking leaves. The memory of kids playing tag in clouds of poison lingers as one of the strangest contradictions of that era. Hospitals reusing medical needles might sound horrifying today, but in the 1950s, it was routine. Syringes and needles were made of metal and glass, designed to be sterilized and used again and again. Nurses boiled them or ran them through rudimentary sterilizers before using them on the next patient. Disposable plastics had not yet revolutionized the medical field, and hospitals operated on tight budgets. Doctors trusted that boiling would kill bacteria, but viruses were less understood. Patients often never questioned whether the equipment touching their skin had been used before. It was simply how medicine worked. Stories from that time recall trays of needles lined up for a day's worth of vaccinations, used for dozens of patients. The practice carried obvious risks that were not fully recognized until later. By the 1960s and 1970s, with the emergence of hepatitis and the HIV crisis, the dangers of reusing needles became undeniable. That shift led to the widespread adoption of single-use disposable syringes, which became standard in hospitals and clinics. Today, even the idea of a reused needle sparks fear, lawsuits, and immediate public outrage. But in the 1950s, it was normal, practical, and rarely questioned. Families trusted doctors implicitly, never realizing how close they were to hidden dangers. Looking back, the routine reuse of needles stands as a chilling reminder of how medicine once cut corners in ways that would be unimaginable now. Children left home alone for hours was not just common in the 1950s, it was expected. Parents worked long shifts, and neighborhoods were considered safe enough that kids were trusted to look after themselves. Grade schoolers walked home, unlocked the door, and waited until evening without adult supervision. This practice became so widespread that the term latchkey kids later entered American vocabulary. In the 1950s, though, it was not a label. It was just life. Parents believed children needed to learn independence, and communities generally looked out for one another. Neighbors assumed if anything serious happened, someone nearby would step in. For the kids, it meant afternoons of freedom, raiding the fridge, watching television, or riding bikes until dark. Laws about child neglect had not yet evolved, so there were no legal consequences. By modern standards, it might sound dangerous or careless, but back then it was simply practical. With fewer organized activities and no constant communication like cell phones, children figured things out on their own. Today, leaving a young child alone for hours could bring police to your door. But in the 1950s, it was seen as part of growing up. Many adults today still remember that strange mix of loneliness and independence with fondness. Looking back, it is surprising how quickly attitudes toward supervision shifted and how what was once totally normal is now considered unacceptable. Car seats that were just booster cushions offered little to no protection in the 1950s. These early models were designed mainly to lift children up so they could see out the window, not to keep them safe in a crash. They had flimsy straps, thin padding, and no real engineering behind them. Parents bought them as conveniences rather than safety devices. Photographs from the era show toddlers strapped loosely into tiny seats perched on top of regular chairs, often with metal frames that would bend on impact. Some models did not even attach to the car properly, sliding around on the seat. Families saw them as luxuries rather than necessities. Most kids still rode in laps or stood between front seats, while the booster was used only for the youngest. By the 1970s, research showed the dangers of unprotected children in car accidents, leading to the development of real child safety seats. Today, strict regulations require rear-facing seats, harnesses, and advanced crash testing. Looking back, it is startling how parents in the 1950s felt reassured by something that would be considered unsafe junk today. But at the time, those little cushions symbolized modern parenting. Families proudly placed their kids in them without realizing they were offering the illusion of safety rather than the real thing. The contrast between then and now is stark, and it shows how much progress has been made in protecting children on the road. Public smoking on buses and trains was as ordinary as buying a ticket in the 1950s. Passengers lit up cigarettes, cigars, or pipes, filling cabins with dense clouds of smoke. Ventilation systems were weak, leaving the air heavy with the smell of tobacco. Children, pregnant women, and non-smokers had no choice but to sit in the haze. Transit companies installed ashtrays into armrests, walls, and even the backs of seats, reinforcing that smoking was expected. Conductors and drivers smoked too, and no one thought twice about it. Ads in the era showed glamorous travelers with cigarettes in hand, linking smoking to sophistication and leisure. The dangers of secondhand smoke were not understood or acknowledged yet. For millions of Americans, the smell of tobacco became part of the memory of long commutes and family trips. Over time, research proved the health risks, and one by one, public smoking bans swept across states. Today, the thought of someone lighting a cigarette on a bus or subway car is shocking and illegal. The shift highlights how much society's view of health and personal space has changed. But in the 1950s, the smoke-filled bus was a moving lounge, a traveling reminder of just how normalized cigarettes were. It is almost hard to believe how common and accepted it once was. Unsafe playground equipment in the 1950s would horrify modern parents. Parks and schoolyards were filled with towering metal slides that baked in the sun, monkey bars set over hard concrete, and seesaws with no safety features at all. Children fell, scraped, broke bones, and often went right back to playing. At the time, injuries were considered part of growing up. Parents expected kids to come home with bruises and saw it as building toughness. The playgrounds themselves were cheaply built, often with sharp edges and little planning for safety. Swings had long metal chains that pinched fingers and threw kids high into the air. Merry-go-rounds spun wildly with no limits, often sending children flying off into the dirt. There were no soft landing surfaces, no helmets, and no protective gear. Despite the risks, kids loved the thrill and independence these playgrounds provided. Safety campaigns did not yet exist, and cities had little funding for improvements. By the 1980s and 1990s, new standards introduced rubber mats, lower equipment, and rounded edges. Today, playground design is carefully regulated, with strict guidelines to prevent injuries. Looking back, it feels incredible that parents once left children to climb 20 feet into the air on flimsy monkey bars. What was normal then would be considered negligence now. The dangerous equipment of the 1950s is gone, but the memories of those wild playgrounds remain vivid for those who lived them. No child-proof caps on medicine bottles made 1950s households far riskier than today. Pills and syrups were sold in glass or plastic containers with simple twist-off lids, easy for children to open. Curious kids often explored bathroom cabinets or kitchen shelves, sometimes swallowing handfuls of brightly colored tablets that looked like candy. Poisonings were tragically common, and emergency rooms saw countless cases of accidental overdoses. Parents tried to keep medicine out of reach, but accidents happened frequently. There were no warning labels as we know them, and bottles rarely included clear safety instructions. At the time, companies prioritized convenience for adults over protection for children. It was not until the 1970s, after pressure from health groups, that child-proof packaging became mandatory. The introduction of push-and-turn caps saved countless lives, even though many adults found them frustrating to use. Today, it is hard to imagine medicine bottles without those safety caps. In the 1950s, though, it was just one more household hazard among many. Parents accepted the risks, hoping careful supervision would be enough. Looking back, it is heartbreaking to think of the preventable tragedies caused by something so simple. A design we now take for granted was once missing entirely, leaving families vulnerable. What was normal then is now recognized as dangerously careless. Glass baby bottles without safety standards were the norm in the 1950s. Parents fed their infants from heavy glass bottles that could crack or shatter if dropped. Rubber nipples were not always durable, and cleaning methods were inconsistent. Many bottles contained imperfections in the glass, making them even more fragile. Despite these risks, they were trusted as the only option at the time. Plastic had not yet taken over, and families believed glass was safe and sterile if boiled. Stories from that era recall bottles breaking in diaper bags, scattering shards near babies, or heating unevenly and burning tiny mouths. Today, baby bottles must meet strict safety regulations, using shatterproof materials and standardized designs. Parents have multiple choices for size, shape, and safety-tested features. In the 1950s, none of that existed. Bottles varied widely, and safety was left up to chance. Parents often wrapped bottles in towels to protect them from breaking, or carried extras in case of accidents. Looking back, it seems incredible that fragile glass was the standard for feeding infants. It was simply what everyone used, and no one thought differently. The shift to safer materials shows just how far childcare has come. What was once ordinary in every nursery is now unthinkable. Kids riding in front seats of cars, even toddlers, was completely normal in the 1950s. Cars had no airbags and dashboards were hard steel, but families saw no reason to keep children in the back. In fact, many parents thought the front seat was safer because they could keep an eye on their kids. Children stood on seats, sat on parents' laps, or even held the steering wheel for fun while the car was moving. Seatbelts were rare, so there was no distinction between front and back safety. Parents cherished the closeness of having kids up front, talking and laughing during drives. Police officers rarely stopped anyone, and safety campaigns had not yet raised awareness. Only decades later, with studies on crash impacts, did the dangers become clear. By the 1990s, laws required children to ride in the back, with booster seats and restraints. Today, seeing a toddler bouncing in the front seat would spark outrage and fines. But in the 1950s, it was a cherished part of family road trips. Parents believed they were giving kids the best view and the safest spot. Looking back now, the thought is terrifying, but for that generation, it was just another piece of normal family life. Drinking water from lead pipes was an invisible hazard in the 1950s. Entire neighborhoods relied on plumbing systems made of lead, unaware of the long-term health risks. Water often traveled through miles of toxic piping before reaching kitchen taps. Families drank it daily, cooked with it, and filled baby bottles without a second thought. At the time, lead was seen as durable and cost-effective, and regulations had not caught up with science. The taste of water sometimes gave hints of contamination, but most people ignored it. Medical research slowly revealed the truth. Lead exposure damages the brain, especially in children, and contributes to developmental issues. Still, widespread replacement of pipes took decades. For families of the 1950s, it was simply tap water, a trusted resource. No one imagined that their daily glass of water could be poisoning them. Today, the use of lead in plumbing is strictly banned, and old systems require costly remediation. But for millions of Americans in the mid-century, it was completely normal. Parents filled pitchers and children gulped glasses without hesitation. Looking back, it is shocking to think how something so basic to life was quietly harmful. The fact that it was accepted so casually makes it one of the most unsettling legacies of the 1950s. Corporal punishment in schools was not only legal in the 1950s, it was expected. Teachers kept wooden paddles in their desks and did not hesitate to use them on students who misbehaved. Parents generally supported this, believing that strict discipline built character and respect for authority. A child sent home with red hands or a sore backside rarely got sympathy. Instead, they might be punished again by their parents for embarrassing the family. Principals carried even larger paddles, and being called to the office meant you were in for a painful lesson. At the time, there were no child advocacy groups to challenge this practice, and laws gave schools the full right to strike students. Looking back today, it feels harsh and abusive, but in the 1950s, it was simply part of education. Students grew up expecting discipline to come with pain, and most parents trusted schools to enforce rules however they saw fit. Today, corporal punishment is banned in most states and condemned by psychologists as damaging to children. What once felt like normal classroom order now looks like a shocking relic of the past. Candy cigarettes were sold openly to children in the 1950s, and nobody thought it was strange. Packs of chalky sugar sticks looked exactly like real cigarettes, complete with branding, red tips, and even smoke-like powder that puffed out when kids blew through them. They were marketed in corner stores, placed right alongside gum and lollipops. Kids pretended to smoke just like their parents, strutting around with candy sticks dangling from their mouths. Adults chuckled at the imitation, seeing it as harmless fun rather than a dangerous introduction to smoking culture. The tobacco industry quietly encouraged these products, seeing them as training wheels for future smokers. It normalized the habit at an age when children were most impressionable. By today's standards, the idea of candy cigarettes feels shocking and reckless. Laws eventually banned candy that mimicked tobacco because of its link to increased smoking rates in teens. But in the 1950s, they were just another sweet treat, shared on playgrounds and at birthday parties. For kids of that generation, candy cigarettes felt like a step toward adulthood, even though the message behind them was troubling. Fireworks in the 1950s came with no age restrictions at all. Children could walk into a store, hand over a few coins, and leave with firecrackers, cherry bombs, and Roman candles. There were no warning labels, no safety gear, and no adults required to supervise. Summer evenings were filled with the sound of explosions as kids experimented with dangerous pyrotechnics. Many burned their fingers, singed their clothes, or worse, lost eyes and hands in accidents that would horrify us today. Yet parents accepted it as part of childhood fun, chalking up injuries as lessons learned. The fireworks industry capitalized on this, marketing brightly colored boxes directly to kids. Only later, as accidents mounted and hospital visits grew, did states begin passing laws that limited sales to adults. Today, fireworks are heavily restricted, with safety warnings and legal age requirements. Looking back, it feels shocking that children once lit fuses and handled explosives without anyone blinking an eye. The casual danger of backyard fireworks shows just how much norms have changed since the 1950s. Selling soda with cocaine derivatives sounds unthinkable now, But traces lingered in some formulas into the 1950s. Coca-Cola had originally been created with coca leaf extract, and though the cocaine was mostly removed by the early 1900s, a process still left behind chemical remnants well into the mid-century. For decades, families drank these sodas daily without realizing their connection to a powerful drug. Companies marketed them as energizing tonics, and parents happily gave bottles to children on hot afternoons. The sweet fizz seemed harmless, especially when advertisements claimed health benefits. In truth, it was a holdover from an earlier era when regulations were almost non-existent. By the 1950s, public health campaigns were catching up, and stricter food safety laws finally forced companies to remove even trace amounts of cocaine derivatives. Today, soda is criticized for sugar and caffeine, but in the 1950s, it carried an even stranger legacy. Looking back, it feels surreal to realize that America's most beloved soft drink was once tied to a narcotic. What was normal then would be banned instantly today. Kids riding bikes without helmets was the rule, not the exception, in the 1950s. Protective headgear was not even sold in most stores, and nobody thought it was necessary. Children tore through neighborhoods on heavy steel bicycles, racing downhill, jumping curbs, and weaving through traffic with no protection at all. Scraped knees and broken bones were treated as normal parts of growing up. Parents encouraged outdoor play and bikes represented independence, but safety was rarely part of the discussion. Accidents were common and sometimes fatal, yet the culture of the time accepted the risks. It was not until decades later, after research showed the life-saving impact of helmets, that states began passing helmet laws for children. Today, sending a child out on a bike without a helmet can result in fines or lectures from other parents. But in the 1950s, kids pedaled off with the wind in their hair and no second thought about danger. The nostalgia of that freedom is strong, but the risks behind it explain why such a practice is now considered reckless and illegal. Lack of booster seats was not an oversight. It was the norm. Children too small for seatbelts simply sat on their knees or curled up cross-legged on the back seat. If you were lucky, you sat on a pillow to see out the window. That was your booster. Parents barely considered height or weight guidelines because there were none to follow. Babies sometimes rode in laps. Toddlers were belted in with adult straps that did little to protect them. Car seat laws were either non-existent or loosely enforced. In many families, a car seat was a hand-me-down with no instructions. Booster seats were rare, and safety testing even rarer. You might remember the seatbelt cutting into your neck or slipping off your shoulder entirely. Nobody measured, nobody adjusted. It was all instinct. But as crash statistics mounted and tragic accidents made headlines, laws slowly changed. By the late 1990s, most states required booster seats for children under a certain age or height. Today, it is unthinkable to drive without one. But for those raised in the back seats of station wagons and minivans, survival often came down to luck. And while cars were full of risks, the real danger sometimes came from inside the home, especially when people handled deadly materials without ever knowing it. Kapok was the stuffing of choice for many children's mattresses and pillows in the 1960s. Sourced from tropical trees, this silky fiber felt soft, light, and luxuriously fluffy. It was marketed as breathable and all-natural, perfect for a good night's sleep. But what parents didn't know was that kapok was also a fire hazard. A single spark could turn that cozy mattress into a roaring blaze. The fibers ignited easily and burned fast, making emergency response nearly impossible once the flames started. There were no flame-retardant treatments, no safety tags, and no warnings. It was just marketed as the next big thing in sleep comfort. And it worked until someone dropped a cigarette or a lamp fell over and the mattress went up like dry leaves. Kids slept on them. Nap time happened on them at daycare. And because kapok was plant-based, it was thought to be safer than synthetic options. Ironically, it was far worse. It packed tighter than cotton, creating airflow dead zones that fanned flames instead of stopping them. Regulations finally caught up and banned the material in children's products, but not before plenty of mattresses went up in smoke. And speaking of hot messes, let's talk about a toy that was meant to race but was better at melting into your carpet. There was something magical about the way the old telephone sat in its little nook. Not on a table, not hanging on a wall like we see in movies, but placed neatly in a purpose-built cubby carved right into the wall itself. These were telephone niches, and they were as common as house keys back in the day. You would see them in hallways, right outside the kitchen, or even tucked near the staircase, with a tiny shelf for the family phone book. Yes, an actual book. And maybe a little drawer for pens, paper, or the odd scribbled message. These spaces were like the beating heart of the house's social life. It is where gossip was whispered, news was broken, and the kids begged their parents to let them stay out late. Today, it is hard to imagine building a wall just for a phone, but back then, it was a sign of class and convenience. The sound of that rotary ring echoed through the whole house, and whoever answered it first? Well, that was usually the person who got stuck taking the message for everyone else. It is a slice of life that simply does not exist anymore, but it lived, loud and proud, in homes all across America. Electric slimming belts were the miracle fitness gadget of the 1980s, or so the ads claimed. Wrap it around your waist, plug it in, flip the switch, and prepare to get electrocuted into peak physical form. These belts sent pulsing electric shocks into your abdomen under the promise of stimulating muscles and burning fat. What they really did? Caused skin burns, fainting spells, and enough emergency room visits to make the Food and Drug Administration step in. They buzzed, jolted, and sometimes sparked, especially if you were sweaty, which the instruction manual encouraged. You'd lie there, twitching like a frog in biology class, convinced the pain meant it was working. These devices became so notorious that many were banned or pulled from shelves by the late 1980s. Today's fitness tech might still overpromise, but at least it doesn't literally jolt you awake. Unless you miss the 1980s, in which case, wait until you see what they handed to kids in the toy aisle next. A survival knife inspired by Rambo. Because what could go wrong? In the 1980s, you did not need to be 18 to buy cigarettes. You just needed spare change. Vending machines stood inside bowling alleys, diners, and even some grocery stores, stocked with packs of Marlboro or Camel. No ID, no questions. Just put in your quarters, pull the lever, and out came a fresh pack. Teenagers often took advantage, slipping away from parents to try their luck. Some machines even had images of cartoon camels or cowboys printed on the front, giving them a strange sense of legitimacy. It was as easy as buying a candy bar and nobody thought twice about it. Of course, the tobacco companies knew exactly what they were doing. These machines were placed in places kids frequented, ensuring that the habit started early. Even adults who did not smoke saw nothing unusual about the glowing cigarette machine sitting against the wall, humming quietly in a family establishment. By the 1990s, these machines were being phased out under new regulations, but for a generation of kids, they were the easiest way to sneak a smoke. Looking back, it is hard to believe that buying something addictive and dangerous was once as casual as playing a pinball machine. Do you remember the clank of the lever and the thrill of pulling a fresh pack into your hands? Leaving kids alone in the car while shopping was as routine as carrying a grocery list. Parents would crack the windows, hand you a book or a juice box, and lock the doors. Then they would disappear into the store, sometimes for 5 minutes, sometimes much longer. You sat in the front seat, pressed buttons, turned knobs, maybe climbed into the back. If you were lucky, the radio stayed on. If you were younger, you played pretend. The car smelled like old vinyl and the warmth of the sun. Sometimes it got too hot. Sometimes you cracked the window a little more, but nobody panicked. Nobody called the police. It was a different kind of trust, one born of a culture that saw parked cars as safe spaces and errands as moments of independence. Today, leaving a child alone in a vehicle, even for a moment, is considered dangerous and illegal in many states. Amber Alerts and heartbreaking headlines have changed the law and the conversation. What was once ordinary now feels like neglect. But for kids of the 1980s, it was a chance to wait, watch, and grow up a little. And if sitting alone in a hot car seems reckless today, just wait until you hear what passed for child car safety back then, because most of us did not even have booster seats. Aurora slot cars were a must-have for every young speedster in the 1960s. The bright colors, snappy bodies, and twisting plastic tracks brought the thrill of racing right into the basement. You'd plug in the controller, slam the trigger, and watch your tiny car whip around the corners like it was chasing the Indy 500. But that thrill came with some unintended side effects. The motors inside those early models ran hot. Too hot. After a few laps, some would overheat and melt the chassis, leaving a smoking puddle where your prized vehicle once sat. Others sparked at random, shooting little arcs of electricity that looked cool, until they scorched your hand. And since the cars were often left plugged in for hours, the plastic casings warped, cracked, or fused with the tracks. Some even caught fire. Parents started noticing the smell first, that sharp, burnt plastic scent that lingered like a warning. Eventually, complaints piled up and multiple models were recalled. But for kids, those slot cars were irresistible. Speed came first, safety came second, or not at all. And if melting race cars weren't shocking enough, just wait until you remember what dads used to do on the roof with a metal rod during a thunderstorm. Walk into an old house and open a closet door, and you might get hit with a smell that is oddly comforting. Woody, warm, a little spicy. That would be cedar, not a scent diffuser, not a spray. Actual cedar wood, lined across the walls of the closet from top to bottom. These cedar-lined closets were the silent guardians of America's wardrobes. They protected against moths, mildew, and musty smells. But they also added a kind of rustic luxury, like storing your clothes inside a tree trunk at a high-end cabin. The idea was simple. Cedar wood naturally repels insects, so why not turn your entire closet into a bug-proof haven? People did not just store coats in there, they kept heirlooms, wool suits, and seasonal clothes safe year-round. Some closets were fully lined, others just had a single cedar panel on one wall. Either way, it gave the whole room a spa vibe long before that was a thing. These days, you might see cedar blocks or hangers sold in stores, but entire closets made of the stuff? That has faded into the woodwork, literally. The world got synthetic, and the cedar charm became a relic. But if you think that was clever, wait until you see how people used to pass food across rooms without ever leaving their chair. Muscle pants for kids, that was the pitch. Somewhere, a grown-up looked at a child and said, "You know what this kid needs? Pants that scream steroid energy." These were Zubaz-style leggings with wild patterns and stretch material designed to mimic the bodybuilding look of adult gym rats. Except they were made for children. The problem was not just the patterns, which, by the way, included everything from neon zebra stripes to camouflage lightning bolts. It was that kids had no idea how to wear them. The pants were often too tight or too loose, and they came with this weird fake athletic vibe that clashed hard with the Sesame Street lunchboxes. These pants were a hard no. Schools started quietly banning them for being distracting, and parents got tired of explaining to teachers that no, their child was not training for a junior weightlifting championship. They were just victims of 1980s fashion. The trend came and went faster than you could say bicep curl. But speaking of trying too hard to look futuristic, let us talk about the time Atari thought your forehead could play video games. If you were a kid in the 1980s, chances are you had a BB gun or cap gun that looked almost identical to the real thing. Painted black, heavy in the hand, and shaped with realistic detail, these toys were designed to mimic actual firearms. Kids would run through neighborhoods playing cops and robbers with what appeared to be real pistols. Back then, nobody raised an eyebrow. Neighbors saw kids sprinting down the street with toy rifles and barely noticed. Police might glance but often assumed it was harmless fun. Parents even encouraged it, seeing the toys as a rite of passage for boys learning about responsibility. The risks were obvious even then. A toy that looked so real could easily be mistaken for a genuine weapon, especially in tense situations. But in the 1980s, the culture dismissed those fears, treating them as part of childhood. It was not until much later that laws began requiring bright orange tips and neon colors to separate toys from real firearms. Looking back, it feels chilling to remember kids waving black painted toy guns in public without fear. Today, the same situation could lead to tragedy. Do you remember gripping a toy gun that felt more like a weapon than a toy? Riding in the open beds of pickup trucks was more than just normal in the 1980s. It was a childhood rite of passage. You can still remember the feeling of the wind slapping your cheeks as the truck bounced down dusty back roads or sped along highways, your legs braced and your hands gripping the cool metal rails. There was no seatbelt, no cushion, just you, the sky, and maybe a sibling or two clinging beside you, giggling or yelling at passing cars. Parents did not think twice. It was just how things were done. Tailgates were for hauling lumber and hauling children. But today, in most states, it is illegal to ride in the bed of a pickup truck unless you are a farm worker or under specific exceptions. Authorities now call it dangerous, irresponsible, unthinkable. But for those who grew up in the 80s, it was freedom on four wheels. If bouncing around in the back of a pickup sounds wild by today's standards, wait until you remember what kids were doing completely unsupervised just a few blocks from home, sandwiched in that glamorized smoking without a hint of warning. And just when you thought that was the low point, someone thought it would be funny to actually sell a toy that involved broken glass in a bag. Yes, seriously. The bag of glass toy kit was one of those ideas that sounds like a joke, because it kind of was, but somehow ended up on actual store shelves. Inspired by a sketch from a comedy show, it became a bizarre reality thanks to novelty companies that took the joke way too far. Inside the package? A small clear bag filled with sharp-edged plastic shards that looked, and in some cases felt, a whole lot like real broken glass. Some versions were labeled as safe plastic, but others? Not so much. The idea was that kids could pretend to play with shattered glass as a prank or just for laughs. But what could possibly go wrong, right? Tiny cuts, choking hazards, or just the sheer confusion of teaching kids that handling jagged shards was entertainment. Parents were either horrified or totally unfazed, depending on their sense of humor. The product didn't last long, and while this prank kit was short-lived, plenty of long-term household items were just as risky, like hair dryers with zero insulation and a plug that sparked like a lightning bolt near the sink. It looked like a cabinet, just a little rectangle in the wall with a tiny knob. But open it up and suddenly you had an ironing board swinging down like a Murphy bed for your clothes. Fold-out ironing boards in the wall were the peak of space-saving genius. These things were especially popular in mid-century homes, when every inch of space had to count. The board folded out flat, usually right next to the laundry area or inside the kitchen pantry. You did not have to drag a heavy metal contraption from the closet. Just pop it open, plug in the iron, and get to work. Some even had a tiny shelf or built-in plug to hold the iron itself, along with a little light above the board. Now that was fancy. Housewives adored these because they made chores quicker. And let's face it, they just looked slick. Like the house was in on the secret with you. Eventually, though, as trends moved toward larger laundry rooms and portable everything, these ironing stations disappeared. But for the folks who grew up with one, there is a real nostalgia there. It was like opening a secret door into domestic life. Now, speaking of secret doors, the next one was not about cleaning your shirt. It was about making sure your closet smelled like the forest. The Garbage Pail Kids movie is the textbook example of a terrible idea being taken way too seriously. The trading cards were already controversial. Gross-out humor, exaggerated features, bodily functions turned into punchlines. But they were iconic. So naturally, someone decided to turn them into a full-length feature film. And it was a mess. The characters were played by little people in horrifying animatronic masks that barely moved, giving every scene a nightmarish vibe. The plot? A vague attempt at a coming-of-age story with elements of science fiction and slapstick comedy, all of it soaked in questionable effects and even worse acting. Even die-hard fans of the cards walked out of theaters feeling like they had just lost a piece of their childhood. Critics called it one of the worst films ever made, and audiences agreed. It tanked at the box office, vanished from theaters, and was quietly swept under the rug. The only thing this movie managed to accomplish was proving that not all nostalgia belongs on the big screen. But if you think that was a bitter taste, just wait until we talk about a candy bar that tried to be classy and ended up at the bottom of the vending machine. Family barbecues in the 1980s often had a familiar sight: parents handing a child a sip of beer. It was framed as harmless, a way to teach responsibility or demystify alcohol. Kids took small gulps from red plastic cups and laughed at the bitter taste. Adults believed it kept children from sneaking alcohol later, treating it as a rite of passage. Uncles joked, grandparents encouraged, and parents smiled proudly at their child learning to be grown up. It was normalized in backyards across the country. Of course, what seemed harmless then would raise eyebrows today. Laws against underage drinking are strict, and even giving a sip could bring consequences. But in the 1980s, it was part of family gatherings, woven into the rhythm of summer afternoons and smoky grills. Looking back, it is startling how common it was. Do you remember the face you made after your first sip of warm beer at a family cookout? Letting kids ride standing up in the back seat was not just overlooked. It was often encouraged. The space between the two front seats was a coveted spot, a mini stage where children stood to give directions, tell stories, or just feel taller. It felt like driving without actually driving. Parents drove with one arm loosely draped over the passenger seat while a child stood between them, gripping the dashboard, peering out at the road like a co-pilot. In the back, kids slid across vinyl seats, bounced with each turn, or lay down and stared at the ceiling. There were no reminders to buckle up, because buckling up was not yet a rule. It was a nuisance. The seatbelt often stayed buried beneath the cushions or was jammed into the crack between the seats. Today, it is illegal for a child to ride without a proper car seat or restraint. Parents now face fines, or worse, for what was once everyday family travel. But back then, riding unrestrained was just another way to feel free. There was trust, or maybe just oblivion. Either way, it was the norm. And if today's laws would call that reckless, the next parenting habit would cause even more of an uproar. It took place in plain sight, often with a crowd watching. Spray on snow was a holiday must-have in the 1960s, a seasonal delight that turned every window into a frosted wonderland. Just shake the can, press the nozzle, and watch as fluffy white patterns appeared across the glass. It was festive, easy to use, and absolutely everywhere. The catch? That soft, pretty snow was often laced with lead-based pigment. Yep, neurotoxins right in the living room. Kids would draw smiley faces and snowflakes, breathing in fumes and getting it on their fingers before heading back to sip cocoa. Parents sprayed entire windows from top to bottom, unaware that every jolly doodle came with a microscopic health warning. When the holidays were over, wiping it off meant smearing fine white dust all over the furniture, and sometimes even using dry cloths that kicked it up into the air again. It stuck to glass, to hands, and to memories. Photos from the era show smiling kids standing in front of the stuff, glowing with seasonal pride and unknowingly inhaling trace amounts of heavy metals. Eventually, safer versions appeared on the market. But for a while, decorating windows was more toxic than tinsel. And if the snow spray didn't get you, the bed you fell asleep on might, because some kids literally snoozed on pillows filled with flammable fluff. You would toss it in and forget about it. That was the beauty of the laundry chute. A small hatch built right into the hallway wall or bathroom cabinet, leading straight down into a hamper, or sometimes directly into the basement laundry room. Just open, drop, and go. These vertical passageways were like magic portals for dirty socks and sweaty gym clothes. No more lugging baskets down 2 flights. No more arguments about whose turn it was. You just lifted the flap and let gravity do the work. Kids treated them like secret tunnels. Parents treated them like a godsend. But like many good things, laundry chutes eventually went out of style. Safety concerns popped up, especially with young kids and pets. And then there was the fire risk, as an open shaft could let smoke and flames move between floors. Add in the rise of compact laundry machines on upper levels, and suddenly, the chute became obsolete. But admit it, there is still something satisfying about the idea of chucking a shirt through the wall. And speaking of walls, wait until you hear about the windows that were not exactly windows. If you were a kid in the 1970s, chugging water straight from the garden hose was basically a rite of passage. You would be out playing tag, riding bikes, or building questionable tree forts and suddenly realize you were dying of thirst. No one ran inside for a water bottle. You went for the hose. You cranked the knob, let the sun-heated water blast out for a few seconds, and then put your mouth right on the nozzle. No one asked where the hose had been or what might be growing inside it. Rubbery taste? Totally normal. Mystery specks? Built character. Parents barely noticed unless you soaked your shirt. Nobody thought twice about what kinds of chemicals were leaching from the plastic or whether small bugs had made it their home. We just drank and kept running. But when it came to food, there were rules. Except during Halloween, when those rules took a break and you took candy from strangers with zero hesitation. In the 1980s, riding in the back of a pickup truck was not just transportation, it was an adventure. Kids piled in after Little League games, sitting on the tailgate or bouncing around in the open bed as the truck rumbled down the road. The wind whipped through their hair and it felt like freedom itself. Parents allowed it without hesitation, often waving as the truck drove off with kids standing upright in the back. Weekend parades, church picnics, and neighborhood gatherings all featured lines of trucks filled with children laughing and waving. Safety was barely an afterthought. Of course, the risks were immense. One sharp turn or sudden stop could throw passengers onto the pavement. But in the 1980s, the focus was on fun and togetherness, not potential accidents. It was simply how kids got around, especially in rural communities. Today, laws forbid it in most places, but the memory of riding in the back of a truck under a summer sky is hard to forget. Do you remember gripping the side of a pickup bed, laughing as the world sped by? Letting kids roam the neighborhood alone was not just common in the 1980s, it was encouraged. Children would vanish after breakfast with a bike, a baseball glove, or just their imagination, and no one blinked an eye. They played near rivers, railroad tracks, junkyards, and alleys. They climbed trees and empty lots, chased each other through sprinkler-soaked lawns, and explored storm drains without ever considering the danger. No cell phones, no GPS. Just a promise to be back before dark, maybe. You followed the smell of backyard barbecue or the jingle of the ice cream truck to know where everyone had gathered. The streets raised them. Strangers were just people you had not met yet. The rule was simple. Stay together, watch out for your younger sibling, and come home when the porch lights came on. Parents trusted the neighborhood, and the neighborhood often looked out for them. There was an unspoken safety net woven through the community, invisible but strong. But today, letting a 10-year-old walk to the park alone can spark a visit from child services. Some parents have even faced legal charges for giving their kids the same freedom they once enjoyed. What was once viewed as independence is now labeled negligence. The culture of watchful fear has replaced the freedom of wandering youth. But if that sounds unsettling, it is nothing compared to what used to happen behind the wheel, while kids were in the back seat. Mercurochrome was the go-to cure-all for scraped knees, elbow bumps, and mystery cuts. Parents swore by it. Kids feared it. That bright reddish-orange liquid came in a glass bottle with a glass applicator wand, and just one dab left a dramatic stain that lasted for days. But here's the kicker. It contained mercury. Yes, mercury, the same heavy metal now known for its toxic effects. Back then, no one seemed too worried. You'd cry over the sting, get that radioactive-looking splotch on your skin, and be sent back outside with a pat on the head. It looked serious. It felt serious. It was practically a badge of honor. But despite the visual drama, the medical risk was invisible and long-lasting. Mercurochrome was banned in several countries over mercury concerns, yet the smell alone could transport you back to childhood panic and Band-Aid negotiations. But if your parents weren't coating your wounds with mercury, they might have been setting you up with something even more explosive, like a fun chemistry set packed with open flames and no supervision. It is one of those things you barely notice until it slides into action. Pocket doors. Unlike the typical swinging door, pocket doors vanish into the wall when opened, like a magic trick you can walk through. They were the height of clever home design in the mid-20th century, especially in homes that wanted a clean, modern look without bulky doors breaking up the space. You would find them separating dining rooms from kitchens or closing off formal living rooms when company arrived. Over time, though, they became a pain. The tracks jammed, the rollers squeaked, and once one went off its rail, good luck fixing it without tearing open the wall. Slowly, builders turned back to swing doors, and pocket doors became a quirky throwback. But if those walls could talk, they would whisper about family dinners, polite goodbyes, and the satisfaction of sliding a whole room out of sight. Now, speaking of questionable style choices, wait until we step into the softest, strangest room in the house, the bathroom. Looking back at these once normal moments now banned, which one surprised you the most? Drop your thoughts in the comments, give this video a like if it brought back memories, and hit subscribe so you do not miss more forgotten stories like these.